Nightingale had never felt such self-blame and regret in her life. She had believed that as long as she stayed by Roland's side, no one could harm him. Yet now, Roland lay in bed, with no external wounds, but had been in a coma for several days. Nightingale didn't believe in gods, but she prayed for Roland to wake up. She was willing to give up anything for that to happen. Lightning pushed open the door and saw Nightingale sitting beside Roland's bed. Lightning informed that the church's pure one has woken up. Upon hearing this, a murderous intent filled Nightingale's eyes as she followed behind Lightning. Agatha was also called over. Ashes and Lightning had been watching the pure one closely. When she awoke, she told everyone that the prison cell made of stone of God's punishment was not going to do anything to her. Isabella sat motionless at the head of the bed, her face covered in dust, still clad in her blood-stained church robe. Before Nightingale could ask a question, Isabella spoke. It seemed like Zero had failed. Nightingale looked coldly at Isabella, but Isabella seemed to ignore the murderous intent in Nightingale's eyes and slowly said she would tell everything she knew. The pure one's attitude left Nightingale in a surprise, as she could discern that Isabella's words were sincere. Isabella first explained her abilities. She could negate the effects of Stone of God's punishment, but beyond that, she had no other powers. Only then did everyone understand why the Stone of God's punishment that Roland wore had suddenly stopped working. Isabella closed her eyes, feeling a regret that she was unable to stop Zero because she had been too obscured by what she claimed to be God's, leading her to believe she was the favored child of God. It was then the three finally understood that it was a pure one, also the church's new pope, named Zero, who was the true culprit behind the attack on Roland, and her ability was the soul battlefield. Isabella explained the soul battlefield was a contest of spirit and willpower, where the loser would lose everything, including their life. Since Zero's awakening, Zero had fought 1,000 battles in the soul battlefield without a single defeat, devouring the souls of mortals and witches alike. By doing so, she could gain their memories, knowledge, and also their lengthy lifespans, which contributed to Zero's long 200 years of life. However, Isabella hadn't expected that Zero would be defeated by a mere mortal king. Hearing this, Nightingale asked if Zero had been defeated, why is Roland still in a coma? Isabella didn't know the answer, but she was certain that Zero must have failed. Since she had never seen this happen to Zero before, perhaps Roland couldn't bear the vast memories, and that was what led to his coma. Nightingale grew more anxious as she listened. If Roland had absorbed all these memories, what would happen to Roland? Which memory would be more dominant? The memories of a pure one who has been serving the church for 200 years, or the 20 years of life as a prince? Would Roland wake up as the same person? And how long would it take for him to wake up? The flood of thoughts and questions made it nearly impossible for Nightingale to maintain her composure. Agatha sensed the change in Nightingale's mood and gradually steered the conversation toward the history of the Church and the Federation. Isabella mentioned that although the letter sent to Roland had been tampered with, the content regarding a witch kingdom and the demons from 400 years ago were all real. Agatha shook her head, telling Isabella that this information had no value to them. Isabella sighed, thinking Agatha did not believe her words. However, when Agatha revealed that she was a witch from the Federation 400 years ago, Isabella was taken aback. Agatha explained that she had witnessed the fall of Takira and that Roland had led them in a battle against the demons already. What Agatha really wanted to know was how the Federation had transformed into the church. After a while, Isabella collected her thoughts and explained that according to historical records, a civil conflict broke out within the Federation during their escape after the fall of Takira, splitting it into two factions. One faction entered the labyrinthine ruins in the mountains, while the other inherited the will of Acaris and settled in Hermes, later founding the church. Agatha frowned, finding it absurd that they would engage in a civil war during their escape, effectively a suicidal act. Isabella slowly recounted the events as described in the historical texts. Many, just like Agatha, had thought the Civil War was foolish. Due to the Civil War, the Federation suffered heavy losses, losing two transcendent witches who were also the top seats at the time, causing the witches to completely separate from the mortal migration group. The faction that later became the church began to hunt down non-combat witches who weren't on their side. Only by doing so could the church bury its past completely. Because of this civil war, the mortals broke free from the Federation's control, establishing the four great kingdoms, causing the numbers of the gods' punishment army to be greatly reduced. Nightingale disdains such acts. To bury the past, they hunted witches and created the mindless gods' punishment killing machine. Isabella held no affection for the church. She pursued all her life for a single goal, which was to defeat the demons. She did not care who controlled the continent or who became the ruler, as this was also the original intent of the Federation. Although Zero had later gone mad, her will in the fight against the demons, and her conviction was firmer than most, which was why Isabella chose to stay by her side and help her. Hearing these words, Nightingale became so angry that she drew her dagger. Agatha caught hold of Nightingale, urging her to calm down, pointing out that killing the pure one in front of them would not wake up Roland. After some time, Nightingale resentfully sheathed her dagger. As they prepared to leave, Isabella suddenly spoke up, mentioning that Zero said the prayer room at the top of the sanctuary could allow one to face the god directly. Leaving the dungeon, Nightingale punched the wall in frustration, still without a way to wake up Roland. Agatha consoled her, reminding her that they had done everything they could and now all they could do was wait. Agatha suggested that the Witch Union should be informed of the situation. Nightingale, struggling to contain her murderous intent, vowed to make Isabella pay, while Agatha sighed and told her that as long as she didn't kill Isabella, it was fine, as Isabella still had much use. Returning to Roland's bedroom, Nightingale found Anna by his side. She quietly retreated to a corner, unfolded into the mist, then stepped into Roland's bedroom. Approaching the bedside, she saw Anna holding Roland's right hand, softly speaking to him. They had made a promise to each other that if Roland died, Anna would lead those willing to follow Roland to continue their fight against the church to the end on Slumbering Isle. Anna, gently touching Roland's face, her eyes brimming with tears, said that but Roland was still alive, nearly deep in sleep. Wiping away her tears, Anna vowed to wait for him, whether it was for a day, a year, or a lifetime, promising to stay by his side to take care of him. Nightingale felt a sharp pang in her heart, a pain more unbearable than any physical injury, as she bent over, clutching her chest tightly and her tears streaming down. Roland felt a piercing pain in his head, and his blurred vision first settled on the stark white ceiling above. As his sight gradually sharpened, a sense of unease grew within him. He sat up abruptly to an unfamiliar setting, half expecting that the battle between him and Zero was still raging on. He tried to summon an RPK for self-defense and looked around for Zero, but he was no longer at the school rooftop. It was a modern room. The place was a bit worn but had fans, a television, and other modern electronics and furniture. There were also some magazines on the coffee table that Roland knew he would never have bought. Just then, the news playing on the television caught Roland's attention. The news reported a school building and its surroundings were completely destroyed the previous night. His mouth opened wide, he could hardly believe his eyes and ears. Rushing to open the door, what he saw outside was the expanse of a modernized city. Suddenly, someone barked at him to move aside. A middle-aged woman looked at him impatiently, her gaze mocking his attire, and that's when he realized he was only dressed in a tank top and underwear. Roland hurried back into the room and shut the door with a bang. He called out loudly for Zero to appear. Despite his shouts, the room remained eerily silent. Confused, he sat down on a stool to piece together what had happened and figure out how he might escape from this place. Roland dragged several chairs together, stacking them from largest to smallest in an improvised tower. He prepared to jump down from the top, hoping this might wake him from this bizarre dream, or at least if it didn't wake him up, the fall wouldn't be too painful. As he swayed back and forth on the precarious stack, the sound of a key turning in the lock echoed from outside the door. Turning his head, he saw a little girl entering. She was around 11 or 12 years old, carrying a red backpack, and her snow-white hair and pale red eyes were immediately recognizable. Zero! Roland shouted, and she, too, appeared startled upon seeing Roland, her surprise evident. But before he could steady himself upon hearing Zero call him uncle, the chairs tumbled down, and he crashed hard onto the floor. When he came to his senses, the scene around him twisted abruptly, as if the world had turned upside down, and his body sprung up. The familiar room of his castle in the city of Neverwinter came back into view. The sound of a wooden basin hitting the floor drew his attention. He turned to see Anna standing frozen in place, then she lunged towards him. After a long embrace, Roland stroked her cheek, noticing how much weight she had lost. Her already thin figure had now become visibly more thinner. Breathing in her subtle fragrance, a sense of longness peace filled him. "How long was I unconscious?" Roland asked. 1 month and 22 days, Anna replied. Roland was astonished to learn he had been unconscious for nearly 2 months. He wondered aloud, wondering how was he able to eat. Flexing his arms, feeling no different than usual. Anna leaned on his shoulder, explaining that Roland hadn't eaten anything, someone else had done it for him. She elaborated that this was the ability of Nightfall, who had planted a seed of symbiotic within him. All Nightfall had to do was to eat an extra portion, Roland would receive the nourishment as well. Roland marveled inwardly that such an ability would exist. Roland turned to Anna and thanked her for taking care of him during these days. He could feel that his body was still clean and fresh, which meant someone must have been washing and changing his clothes regularly. It must have been a tedious process. Anna shook her head, dismissing the effort as nothing compared to what Roland had done for them. Roland had kept his promise to the witches, defeating the church. Anna noted that everyone in the entire witch union was willing to do anything for Roland. Anna whispered that even if it wasn't her, others would have eagerly taken care of Roland as well. Roland grasped Anna's hand, gazed into her eyes, and gently hugged and kissed her, expressing that he preferred her care above anyone else's. It took a while before they could bear to part, a flush of red blooming on Anna's cheeks. She hurriedly said she needed to inform everyone, as they had been eagerly awaiting this day. Roland wanted to continue, but Anna, concerned, suggested he should rest more. Roland insisted he felt strong all over. Anna broke free with a blush and scurried away, saying she would be right back. Roland smiled, and then his thoughts returned to the little girl he had seen before falling unconscious. Could that have been Zero? Why would she call him uncle? What exactly had happened? As he was lost in thought, the noise outside the room grew louder. A group of witches burst into the bedroom, surrounding him, making Roland somewhat embarrassed under their collective gaze. He apologized for worrying everyone. Agatha tried to use a magic stone to test Roland's magical energy but got no response. Saying Roland didn't seem to obtain Zero's magical energy or her ability. When asked if he had any of Zero's memories, Ashes was the first to step forward, questioning how to prove this Roland was the very Roland they knew. Nightingale's voice came from the other side of the bed, affirming that he was indeed Roland, although her expression was somewhat downcast. Lightning didn't wait for Roland to finish speaking, leaping onto the bed and hugging his neck tightly. Then the other witches of the Union followed, and Tilly approached as well, softly calling him brother. Holding Roland's hand with a smile, she warmly said, "Welcome back, brother." News of Roland's recovery spread quickly, and everyone rushed to see him, their faces showing palpable relief upon his return. Roland wisely chose not to inquire about state affairs, understanding that his long absence had likely caused unrest among the people in the city of Neverwinter. His current priority was to uplift spirits, making it known that their king was well again. In the evening, a lavish feast was held within the castle, and Roland ensured that porridge, meat, and drinks were distributed in the squares for all the citizens to partake in the celebration. After the feast, Roland returned to his bedroom and called for Nightingale. However, there weren't any responses. Roland called Nightingale again, saying he knew Nightingale was in the room. It was then that Nightingale finally appeared, her face downcast and emotion low. She was about to apologize, but Roland cut her off. He didn't want to see her blaming herself, especially when he was safe and unharmed. This was never Nightingale's fault, to begin with. Nightingale clenched her fist, and softly said Agatha had warned her about it, but... Before she could finish her sentence, Roland pulled her towards his chest. It was the first time Roland had taken the initiative to hug Nightingale. Roland had prepared many comforting and reassuring words, but when it came time to speak them, the words suddenly seemed unnecessary. He knew that before Zero's attack had landed on him, Nightingale had been ready to sacrifice herself to protect him from Zero's attack. What more could he ask from someone who had been prepared to give everything for him? "Wait a little longer," he whispered, "no matter what the future holds, we'll face it together." At that, Nightingale relaxed completely, her expression turning resolute once more. No explanation was needed, and they both knew what Roland meant. "Okay, I'll wait," Nightingale whispered back. Tears began flowing, but not a single trace of sorrow in them. It was all joy and happiness. After Nightingale left, Roland slept peacefully, comforted by the initiative forward he had taken in their relationship. However, sleep brought him back to the dream world. This time, with the knowledge of how to wake up from the dream world, he felt more composed. Massaging the slight ache at the back of his head, he left his room and encountered the young white-haired girl, no other than Zero, coming out of the kitchen with a plate in hand. Zero looked at Roland with a mix of reproach and concern, questioning what was he doing yesterday? Zero still addresses him as uncle. When Roland called out Zero's name, the little girl rolled her eyes, placing the fruit on the table and urging him to eat breakfast. Her voice was soft and youthful, her attire, a light blue dress, just like a young child who hardly matched the image of the Zero who had killed him 5 times in the soul battlefield and vowed to devour him. Confused about where he was, Roland picked up the fruit knife in the kitchen, contemplating his next move. Could he possibly consider harming this girl? As he drew closer, Zero lifted her hair and asked Roland what he had done the previous day, wondering if he was hunting for the roaches on the ceiling. Roland made up an excuse, saying he was just trying to clean the dust. Zero pouted and told him to be more careful next time. With concern, she asked if his head was all right. Zero also mentioned that she had been taking care of all the cleaning ever since she arrived. Roland was filled with questions about what she meant by "since she arrived," but he did not ask them out loud. Watching his confused demeanor, Zero stretched out her hand, asking for money to buy groceries for the day. Zero mentioned that the fridge was empty, and she needed to buy some groceries. Roland instinctively searched himself but found no wallet. With a sigh, Zero speculated that her uncle must have damaged his brain, pouting as she directed him to the bedside table's second drawer. True to her word, Roland found a withered wallet there, which, upon opening, sadly contained only 2 banknotes. Zero asked for 20, but Roland handed her 50. Zero looked at him strangely, then stuffed the money into her small purse. Noticing a band-aid wrapped around her finger, Roland inquired what happened. Zero shrugged it off, explaining she cut herself while picking up glass, the same glass from the cup Roland had broken during his fall. Zero didn't seem too bothered by it and simply put on her backpack and headed for school. Roland was puzzled, as students should be on summer vacation, but Zero mentioned she was going to tutoring class. She cast a wary glance at her uncle. Odd that her uncle forgot about this. She turned around and then turned back, suggesting Roland visit the hospital if his headache persisted. She left swiftly, joining 2 other girls at the bottom of the stairs, chattering and laughing as they disappeared down the alley. Roland rubbed his forehead. This dream was becoming increasingly bizarre. To think that Zero has friends was an odd development. Just as he considered following them, he suddenly froze. A striking woman with long hair the same color as his, with arched eyebrows, and an eye patch was walking towards him. It was no other than Garcia. Roland's hand subconsciously moved toward the fruit knife at his waist. However, Garcia asked him to get out of the way. Surprised, Roland questioned if she didn't recognize him. Garcia laughed coldly, visibly disgusted by his tank top and underwear combination, implying that just because Roland dyed his hair like hers didn't mean he could pretend to be familiar with her. Roland watched her, moved aside to let her pass, and then said, "Your name is Garcia, right?" The woman's expression darkened, and she suddenly swung a punch that stopped right in front of Roland's face. She threatened him, telling Roland that even though she didn't know how he came to know her name, she warned him not to bother her again. Only when she returned to her room and slammed her door did Roland notice the room number, 0827, just a couple of doors down from his. As he looked down the corridor, a chilling thought dawned on him. He started to sprint down the corridor, quickly reaching apartment number 0899. He wondered how many residents lived in this apartment building, looking above, and it even had more floors up top. Suddenly, he recalled Zero's words to him on the soul battlefield. Over the long years, I have devoured thousands of warriors and witches, including an extraordinary witch. You have no chance of winning against me. A horrifying speculation made Roland break into a cold sweat. Could it be that the inhabitants of this place were all those who had fallen in the soul battlefield? And now, had Zero also become one of them? Hello everyone. Firstly, I want to extend my deepest gratitude who've reached the end of the video without clicking off. I would love to hear your opinions as we ponder the future of this series. It's been an extraordinary journey with our protagonist, Roland, a modern-day engineer, watching him get isekai'd into a medieval world with magic and witches. Together, we've witnessed his incredible feats, from building and reforming the border town and crafting the very first steam engine, flintlock, and revolver, to advancing to bolt-action rifles, cannons, artillery, and warships. We've witnessed the border town repelling demonic beasts, Duke Ryan, Timothy, and the church. And let's not forget the expansion of his witch harem, witch friends. However, after defeating Zero, the introduction of the dream world had a fair amount of debate. Most would consider it to feel like filler episodes. The modern style is out of sync with the overall rhythm in the previous medieval witch farming plot. There are a few ways we can continue the story. We could opt out of segments about the dream world altogether, focusing solely on the main storyline to maintain the momentum. Alternatively, we could choose to cover everything, including the dream world, which would mean a slower progression. Or perhaps we could momentarily bypass the dream world segments, and I'll create a detailed recap dedicated specifically to those parts at a later date. Please drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you.